Building and maintaining a D&D group remains the hardest part of running D&D games. People are busy. They're complicated creatures with lots of things going on in their lives and lots of commitments. And getting a group of them around your table regularly is really hard to do. If you browse any of the major forums for D&D, invariably you find people talking about the difficulty of getting players around the table regularly. There are actually memes about it. It's just a constant problem for a lot of people. I don't have any magic solutions to this problem, but I do have 3 tips that I'd like to offer to make it a little bit easier to get players around your table regularly for your D&D games. My first tip is to schedule games regularly. Consistency is king. Instead of trying to schedule each game around the schedules of the players, set a regular time and a regular day that you play D&D. If you can do this weekly, that works really, really well. One way to fit this in is to make sure that the games aren't too long. If you're trying to fit in a 4 to 6 hour game, that might be too long to fit into any one block in anybody's schedule every week. But if you run a shorter game, 2 or 3 hours, you could probably fit that in a little bit better. The key is to schedule the games that's at the same time every time, and that the players who regularly show up recognize that this is their time to play D&D. They fit it into their schedule, and they fit the rest of their schedule around the game instead of the other way around. My second tip is to run what I call a 6+2 group. In this way, you have 6 regular players, 6 players who are committed to showing up as often as they can. And you have 2 on-call players, 2 players who can't necessarily commit to showing up all of the time, but still want to play and are willing to jump in when there's a free slot at the table. This gives you a total pool of 8 players for your game, and you'd never actually have all 8 at your table. You'd never have more than 6, but it gives you a large pool of players to ensure that enough players are going to show up. And that gets to tip 3. Run your game even if you only have 4 players who can show up. If you're willing to run your game with 4 players, that means if you're running a 6+2 group, that it takes 5 people canceling before you actually can't run a game. If you're trying to schedule your game so that every one of your core players is there, you're always going to have difficulty getting that game scheduled because it's very likely that somebody can't make it. If you require everyone at the table, it means a lot of games just aren't going to happen. If, on the other hand, you make it clear to all of the players that the game is going to go on even if they can't make it, and you have a 6+2 group, it means 5 people need to cancel before you can't run a game. This creates a far more robust game, a game that is very likely to happen because it takes a lot of people not being able to show up before that game doesn't occur. Now, this kind of group isn't perfect. It's definitely going to have some challenges. One of them is if you have a particular storyline built around a particular character and that player doesn't show up, you're going to be kind of stuck. A way to deal with this is to make sure that your story is flexible enough that you can pivot even if one character isn't there and even if the storyline was written around that one particular character. Generally speaking, you try to keep your storyline not so connected to any one character that if that character can't play, if that player can't show up, the game can still go on. Second, you're probably going to have to tune your combat encounters dramatically depending on how many people are there. If you have only 4 characters, you're going to want to tune down your monsters a little bit or have fewer monsters in the battle. Likewise, if you have 6, you're going to want to increase the number of monsters and maybe increase their damage output and their hit points. We talked all about this when we talk about the dials of monster difficulty. And third, you're going to have to account for characters either disappearing or reappearing at different parts of the game. Generally speaking, the best way to handle this is just to let them appear and disappear without worrying about it too much. The players understand why that character doesn't happen to be there in this session, or why the character suddenly appears. If you have a way to handle it in story, you should go ahead and do it, even if it's a little goofy. The idea of we keep a couple of extra characters in our bag of holding, it's kind of funny, but you can go with it. The main thing is that playing D&D is more important than maintaining a perfectly cohesive arc. The players understand that we're just around the table playing a game, and if a couple people can't be there and their characters kind of disappear from a situation, if you have a way to handle it in the story, that's great. But if you don't, just let them fade into the background. Likewise, if you can think of a reason why a character suddenly shows up in the middle of a dungeon, great. If you can't, just have them show up. It's really not that big a deal, and playing D&D is more important than that in-story consistency. So none of these tricks are perfect, and none of them are the solution to building and maintaining a group. Building and maintaining a group is just a really hard part of D&D. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of care. But hopefully these 3 tips can give you a little extra leverage for putting together a regular D&D game. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You can support me directly on Patreon. You can subscribe to my videos here on YouTube, or you can pick up any of my books. Thank you very much and have a great day.